My name is Alfred Johnson, and I'm a Royal Guard at Buckingham Palace. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon, the 15th of July 2024, around 2:30 p.m. when I witnessed a rather disturbing incident unfold right before my eyes. I was stationed at my usual post near the palace gates, keeping a watchful eye on the tourists and passers-by, when I noticed a group of young men harassing an elderly gentleman across the street. What shocked me most was not their audacity to cause a scene in broad daylight, but the fact that their target was a 91-year-old war veteran, and they were spewing racial slurs at him. Little did they know, I was watching their every move, and I wouldn't let them get away with it. The beginning. Mr. Charles Peterson, a proud veteran of World War II, decided to take a leisurely stroll down the streets of London, enjoying the pleasant afternoon sunshine. At 91, he still held himself with the same dignity and strength he had in his youth, his medals proudly displayed on his chest. He had always loved his walks, a chance to reflect on his life and the sacrifices he made for his country. However, this day took an unexpected turn. As Mr. Peterson ambled down the bustling street, he noticed a group of young men loitering near a corner. They were loud and boisterous, their laughter echoing through the otherwise peaceful afternoon. Initially, he paid them no mind, assuming they were just a group of friends enjoying their day. But as he neared them, their attention shifted towards him, their laughter turning into sneers and snide remarks. "Look at the old-timer," one of them jeered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Probably can't even remember his own name." Mr. Peterson, choosing to ignore their taunts, continued his walk, hoping they would lose interest. But they didn't. Instead, they grew bolder, their remarks escalating into racial slurs, their words like daggers aimed at his heart. "Hey, Grandpa," another one shouted, his voice laced with malice. "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" Mr. Peterson's heart sank. He had faced discrimination before, but it still stung, especially coming from a generation that had benefited from the sacrifices of people like him. He quickened his pace, hoping to put some distance between himself and the group. But they wouldn't let him escape that easily. They followed him, their voices growing louder, their insults more vicious. Mr. Peterson felt a surge of anger, a desire to confront them, to remind them of the sacrifices he and countless others had made for their freedom. But he knew better. He was an old man now, and a confrontation could easily turn dangerous. Just as he was about to cross the street, hoping to lose them in the crowd, one of the men stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Where do you think you're going, old man?" he sneered, his face inches away from Mr. Peterson's. "We're not done with you yet." Mr. Peterson felt trapped, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around for help, but the passers-by seemed to ignore the unfolding scene, their faces averted, their steps hurried. He felt a wave of despair wash over him. Was this how his day would end, humiliated and harassed by a group of ignorant youths? Just then, a voice boomed from across the street, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Leave him alone." The group turned their heads towards the source of the voice, their faces contorted in surprise. Standing there, tall and imposing, was a royal guard, his eyes fixed on them, his expression stern. The young men, taken aback by the sudden intervention, exchanged uneasy glances. They had been so engrossed in their harassment of Mr. Peterson that they hadn't noticed the royal guard observing them from across the street. The guard's presence, his uniform and stern demeanor, was enough to make them falter. "What's going on here?" the guard demanded, his voice echoing with authority. The men, their bravado momentarily forgotten, mumbled incoherent excuses, trying to downplay their actions. But the guard wasn't fooled. He had witnessed their behavior, their hateful words, their blatant disrespect towards an elderly man. "I saw what you were doing," he said, his voice laced with disapproval. "Your behavior is unacceptable. Leave this gentleman alone, or I'll be forced to take action." The men, realizing they were caught red-handed, decided to retreat. They muttered apologies, their faces flushed with shame, and quickly dispersed into the crowd. Mr. Peterson, relieved and grateful, nodded his thanks to the guard. "Thank you, officer," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I appreciate your help." "It was my duty, sir," the guard replied, his voice softening. "No one deserves to be treated that way." The guard then escorted Mr. Peterson across the street, ensuring he was safe. As they walked, Mr. Peterson shared his experiences as a war veteran, his stories of bravery and sacrifice. The guard listened intently, his respect for the elderly gentleman growing with each word. After a short walk, they reached Mr. Peterson's destination, a quaint little cafe where he often enjoyed his afternoon tea. The guard bid him farewell, promising to keep an eye out for him during his future walks. Mr. Peterson, his spirits lifted, thanked the guard once again and entered the cafe. As the guard resumed his post, he couldn't help but reflect on the incident. He was disgusted by the behavior of the young men, their ignorance and disrespect. He was also proud of himself for intervening, for standing up for what was right. He knew that his actions, though small, had made a difference in Mr. Peterson's day. Later that evening, as the guard was finishing his shift, he received a call from his superior officer. He was informed that Mr. Peterson had filed a complaint against the young men, and the police were now investigating the incident. The guard was asked to provide a statement, his testimony crucial in identifying the perpetrators. The guard, without hesitation, agreed to cooperate. He recounted the events of the afternoon, providing a detailed description of the young men and their actions. He felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that justice would be served. The next day, the guard returned to his post, his mind still preoccupied with the incident. He couldn't shake off the image of Mr. Peterson, his face etched with fear and humiliation. He vowed to remain vigilant, to ensure that such an incident wouldn't happen again. As he was patrolling the area, he noticed a familiar figure approaching him. It was Mr. Peterson, his face beaming with a smile. "Officer, I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday," Mr. Peterson said, his voice filled with warmth. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate it." The guard was touched by Mr. Peterson's gratitude. He assured him that it was his duty to protect and serve, and that he was always there to help. "I also wanted to let you know that the police have identified the young men," Mr. Peterson continued. "They will be facing charges for their actions." The guard nodded, a sense of justice prevailing. He was glad that the perpetrators would be held accountable for their actions. "Thank you for letting me know, sir," the guard replied. "I'm glad justice is being served." Mr. Peterson then invited the guard to join him for tea at the cafe. The guard, surprised and honored, accepted the invitation. As they walked towards the cafe, the guard felt a sense of camaraderie with Mr. Peterson, a bond forged through a shared experience. Inside the cafe, they chatted over tea and biscuits, their conversation flowing effortlessly. They talked about their lives, their families, their experiences. The guard learned more about Mr. Peterson's time in the war, his stories of courage and resilience. He was amazed by the elderly man's spirit, his unwavering optimism despite the hardships he had faced. As the afternoon drew to a close, the guard bid farewell to Mr. Peterson, promising to visit him again soon. He left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose, his heart filled with admiration for the elderly veteran. He knew that their encounter was more than just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right, of protecting the vulnerable, and of honoring those who have served their country. The next few days passed uneventfully for Alfred. He continued his duties with renewed vigor, his encounter with Mr. Peterson serving as a constant reminder of the importance of his role. He found himself paying closer attention to the people around him, more aware of the subtle signs of distress or discomfort. He was determined to be a vigilant guardian, a protector of the innocent. One morning, as Alfred was patrolling the area near the palace gates, he noticed a commotion brewing across the street. A group of tourists were gathered around a young woman, their faces etched with concern. Alfred, his curiosity piqued, decided to investigate. As he approached the group, he heard the woman's frantic cries for help. She was clutching her handbag tightly, her face pale with fear. A young man, his face obscured by a hoodie, was attempting to snatch her bag, pulling at it with all his might. Alfred, without hesitation, sprang into action. He crossed the street in a few swift strides, his imposing figure parting the crowd like the Red Sea. "Stop," he bellowed, his voice commanding attention. The young man, startled by the sudden interruption, turned to face Alfred. His eyes widened in fear as he recognized the royal guard, his uniform and stern expression leaving no doubt about his authority. The would-be thief, realizing he was caught red-handed, released the handbag and attempted to flee. But Alfred was quicker. He grabbed the man by the arm, his grip like a vice. "Not so fast," he said, his voice laced with steel. The woman, relieved and grateful, rushed to retrieve her handbag. She thanked Alfred profusely, her voice trembling with emotion. Alfred, ever the humble servant, simply nodded in acknowledgement. He then turned his attention to the apprehended thief, his eyes burning with anger. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Preying on innocent people is a cowardly act." The thief, his head bowed in shame, mumbled an apology. Alfred, however, was not in a forgiving mood. He marched the man towards the palace gates, where he handed him over to the police. As the police led the thief away, Alfred felt a sense of satisfaction. He had once again upheld justice, protected the innocent, and fulfilled his duty as a royal guard. He returned to his post, his chest puffed with pride. The news of Alfred's bravery spread quickly throughout the palace. His colleagues praised his quick thinking and decisive action. His superiors commended his dedication to duty and his unwavering commitment to protecting the public. Alfred, though humbled by the accolades, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that his actions, though small, had made a difference. Later that day, Alfred received a surprise visitor. It was Mr. Peterson, accompanied by his daughter, Emily. They had come to express their gratitude for Alfred's intervention in the attempted robbery. "We heard about what you did," Emily said, her voice filled with admiration. "You're a true hero." Alfred, blushing slightly, downplayed his actions. He insisted that he was simply doing his job. Mr. Peterson, however, would not hear of it. He praised Alfred's courage and quick thinking, emphasizing the importance of his actions in protecting the community. "You're a credit to your uniform, young man," Mr. Peterson said, his voice filled with warmth. "We need more people like you in this world." Alfred, touched by their kind words, thanked them for their appreciation. He then invited them to join him for tea at the palace cafeteria. Over tea and biscuits, Alfred and the Petersons chatted about their lives, their experiences, and their hopes for the future. Alfred learned more about Mr. Peterson's family, his wartime experiences, and his unwavering optimism despite the challenges he had faced. As the afternoon drew to a close, the Petersons bid farewell to Alfred, expressing their gratitude once again. Alfred, his heart warmed by their visit, watched them leave, a smile playing on his lips. He returned to his post, his spirits lifted, his sense of purpose renewed. He knew that his encounter with the Petersons was more than just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of the impact he could have on the lives of others, a testament to the power of kindness and courage. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, Alfred noticed a group of young men loitering near the gates. Their faces were familiar, their expressions hostile. Alfred's heart sank. He recognized them as the same group who had harassed Mr. Peterson a few weeks ago. They were back, and this time, they seemed to be targeting him. Alfred felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew he couldn't back down. He was a royal guard, a symbol of authority and protection. He had a duty to uphold, a responsibility to protect the public, even if it meant facing danger himself. He straightened his posture, his eyes fixed on the approaching group. He gripped his ceremonial sword tightly, his knuckles turning white. He was ready for whatever they threw at him. The group, emboldened by their numbers, swaggered towards Alfred, their faces contorted in sneers. They hurled insults and threats, their voices echoing across the palace grounds. "Hey, palace guard," one of them shouted, his voice laced with mockery. "Think you're tough, huh?" "Yeah, well, we're not scared of you," another one chimed in, his voice dripping with malice. "We're gonna teach you a lesson you won't forget." Alfred remained unfazed. He had faced tougher adversaries in his training, endured harsher conditions in his service. He wouldn't be intimidated by a group of petty thugs. "I advise you to leave," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is not the place for your kind of behavior." His words, however, fell on deaf ears. The group continued their advance, their voices growing louder, their threats more menacing. They circled Alfred, like predators stalking their prey. Alfred, sensing the imminent danger, drew his sword. The gleaming blade flashed in the fading sunlight, a stark reminder of his authority. The sight of the drawn sword momentarily halted the group's advance. They exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado momentarily forgotten. But their hesitation was short-lived. One of them, bolder than the rest, lunged at Alfred, his fist aimed at the guard's face. Alfred, quick as a flash, parried the blow with his sword, the metal clanging against bone. The attacker yelped in pain, clutching his injured hand. His companions, enraged by their comrade's injury, surged forward, their fists flying. Alfred, his senses heightened, moved with surprising agility for a man of his age. He deflected their blows, his sword a whirlwind of steel. He landed a few well-aimed kicks, sending some of them sprawling to the ground. The fight was fierce but brief. Alfred, despite being outnumbered, was a trained soldier, his skills honed through years of rigorous training. He quickly gained the upper hand, his attackers reeling from his blows. Just as the fight seemed to be turning in Alfred's favor, a new threat emerged. One of the thugs, unnoticed in the chaos, had picked up a rock from the ground. He hurled it at Alfred with all his might. The rock struck Alfred on the side of the head, sending him crashing to the ground. His vision blurred, his head throbbing, he struggled to regain his senses. The thugs, sensing their opportunity, pounced on Alfred. They kicked and punched him, their blows raining down on his defenseless body. Alfred, his strength waning, his consciousness fading, felt a wave of despair wash over him. Was this the end? Would he be defeated by a group of cowardly thugs? Just as he was about to lose consciousness, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Leave him alone." The thugs, startled by the sudden interruption, turned their heads towards the source of the voice. Standing there, tall and imposing, was Mr. Peterson, his eyes blazing with anger. The thugs, momentarily stunned by Mr. Peterson's unexpected appearance, froze mid-attack. They hadn't expected the elderly veteran to intervene, let alone confront them with such ferocity. Mr. Peterson, despite his age, stood tall and defiant, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You cowards," he roared, his voice echoing across the palace grounds. "Attacking a man while he's down. Have you no shame?" The thugs, their bravado crumbling in the face of Mr. Peterson's fury, exchanged nervous glances. They had underestimated the old man, mistaking his age for weakness. They were now realizing their grave mistake. Mr. Peterson, fueled by adrenaline and a burning sense of justice, charged towards the thugs, his cane raised high. With surprising strength, he brought it down on one of the thug's legs, the impact echoing with a sickening crack. The thug howled in pain, collapsing to the ground. The other thugs, witnessing their comrade's swift downfall, hesitated. Mr. Peterson, seizing the opportunity, pressed his attack. He swung his cane with precision, landing blows on their arms and shoulders, each strike accompanied by a grunt of exertion from the old man and a yelp of pain from his attackers. The thugs, completely caught off guard by the elderly man's ferocity, stumbled back. They had anticipated an easy victory, but they were now facing a whirlwind of righteous fury in the form of a seemingly frail old man. Alfred, his vision clearing, though his head still pounded, watched in awe as Mr. Peterson single-handedly held off the thugs. He had never seen the old man so animated, so full of fight. It was like a dormant lion had suddenly awakened. Inspired by Mr. Peterson's courage, Alfred struggled to his feet. He gritted his teeth against the throbbing pain in his head and drew his sword again, the gleaming blade catching the last rays of the setting sun. The thugs, seeing that Alfred had recovered, and now facing both him and the surprisingly formidable Mr. Peterson, decided it was time to retreat. Their earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by fear and a desperate urge to escape. They turned and fled, disappearing into the gathering shadows. Alfred and Mr. Peterson watched as the thugs disappeared, their retreating figures swallowed by the twilight. They then turned to each other, their faces etched with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Alfred said, his voice filled with admiration. "You saved me." "Nonsense, young man," Mr. Peterson replied, his voice still laced with adrenaline, but a hint of a chuckle in his tone. "We saved each other." They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, the adrenaline slowly subsiding. Alfred, his head still throbbing, leaned heavily on his sword. Mr. Peterson, his chest heaving, gripped his cane tightly. "Come on, Alfred," Mr. Peterson said, his voice regaining its usual warmth. "Let's get you to the infirmary." Alfred nodded, grateful for the support. He sheathed his sword, his hand still trembling slightly. Mr. Peterson, despite his own exertion, gently helped Alfred towards the palace, his arm around the younger man's shoulders. They walked slowly, two unlikely heroes, bound by a shared experience and a newfound respect for each other. "Come on, Alfred," Mr. Peterson said, his voice regaining its usual warmth. "Let's get you to the infirmary." Alfred nodded, grateful for the support. He sheathed his sword, his hand still shaking slightly. Mr. Peterson, despite his own exertion, gently helped Alfred towards the palace, his arm around the younger man's shoulders. As they walked, they were met by a flurry of activity. News of the altercation had spread quickly, and several guards rushed towards them, their faces etched with concern. Alfred reassured them that he was all right, thanks to Mr. Peterson's intervention. Inside the palace infirmary, Alfred was examined by the palace physician. He received treatment for his head wound and a few bruises, nothing serious thankfully. Mr. Peterson stayed by his side, offering words of comfort and encouragement. Word of the incident reached the highest levels of the palace. The Queen herself expressed her gratitude to both Alfred and Mr. Peterson for their bravery. She commended Alfred for his dedication to duty and praised Mr. Peterson for his selfless act of courage. The story of the Royal Guard and the veteran quickly spread throughout the city, capturing the hearts of the public. People were inspired by their bravery, their willingness to stand up for what was right, regardless of the danger. Alfred and Mr. Peterson became symbols of courage and resilience, their story a testament to the enduring human spirit. In the days that followed, Alfred and Mr. Peterson were showered with praise and gratitude. They received letters of appreciation from people all over the country, thanking them for their service and bravery. The media hailed them as heroes, their story a welcome antidote to the negativity that often dominated the news. Alfred, humbled by the attention, remained grounded. He knew that he was simply doing his duty, fulfilling his responsibility as a royal guard. He was grateful for the recognition, but he was more touched by the outpouring of support from the public. Mr. Peterson, despite the media attention, remained his humble self. He was simply glad that he could help Alfred, a man he had come to respect and admire. He was proud of the role he had played in defending the guard, and he was grateful for the opportunity to show the world that age was no barrier to courage. The incident brought Alfred and Mr. Peterson closer together. They became fast friends, their bond forged through shared experience and mutual respect. They often met for tea at the palace cafeteria, sharing stories and laughter. Their friendship became a source of strength and comfort for both of them. One afternoon, as they were enjoying their tea, Mr. Peterson turned to Alfred with a thoughtful expression. "Alfred," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about those thugs." Alfred nodded, his brow furrowed. He too had been thinking about the incident, the anger and hatred in the eyes of their attackers. "I don't understand it," Mr. Peterson continued, his voice filled with sadness. "Why would they attack us? What did we ever do to them?" Alfred remained silent, struggling to find an answer. He had always believed in the inherent goodness of people, but the incident had shaken his faith. He couldn't comprehend the senseless violence, the hatred that seemed to consume some individuals. "I think I know why," Mr. Peterson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's because of who we are." Alfred looked at Mr. Peterson, his eyes questioning. "It's because I'm black," Mr. Peterson continued, his voice gaining strength. "And you're a royal guard, a symbol of authority. They hate us for what we represent." Alfred's heart sank. He had known that racism existed, but he had never experienced it firsthand. He had always believed that people were judged by their character, not by the color of their skin. But Mr. Peterson's words opened his eyes to a harsh reality, a reality where prejudice and hatred still thrived. "It's not fair," Alfred said, his voice filled with anger. "We shouldn't be judged by our race or our uniform. We should be judged by our actions, by our character." Mr. Peterson nodded in agreement. "You're right, Alfred. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. There are still people in this world who cling to their prejudices, who refuse to see beyond the color of someone's skin. What can we do?" Alfred asked, his voice filled with frustration. Mr. Peterson smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "We can continue to be ourselves, Alfred. We can continue to stand up for what is right, to show the world that we are not defined by our race or our uniform. We can be an example to others, a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes seems filled with darkness." Alfred nodded, his spirits lifted by Mr. Peterson's words. He knew that the fight against prejudice and hatred was far from over, but he was determined to do his part. He would continue to serve with honor, to protect the innocent, and to be a symbol of hope and unity. As they finished their tea, Alfred and Mr. Peterson made a pact. They would continue to fight for a better world, a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background. They would be a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the oppressed. They would be a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. "You're right. We haven't quite reached the peak of the story as described in the title. My apologies, I got carried away with their developing friendship and Mr. Peterson's memoirs. Let me rectify that and provide a more fitting conclusion to the story, bringing it back to the core theme and fulfilling the promise of the title." The weeks following the incident were a whirlwind. Alfred and Mr. Peterson were lauded as heroes. Newspapers ran their story, praising their bravery. The Queen even invited them for a private audience, thanking them personally. But amidst the celebrations, a shadow lingered. The thugs who attacked them were still at large. The police investigation was ongoing, but with little progress. Frustration gnawed at Alfred. He felt a responsibility to bring those men to justice, not just for himself, but for Mr. Peterson and for all those who had ever been victims of such senseless hate. One evening, while on patrol near the palace gates, Alfred noticed a group of young men loitering across the street. His heart pounded. He recognized them instantly, the same sneering faces, the same swaggering postures. It was the thugs. Alfred's first instinct was to confront them, to apprehend them on the spot. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed backup. He discreetly radioed for assistance, his voice calm despite the surge of adrenaline. While waiting for reinforcements, Alfred kept a watchful eye on the group. They seemed unaware of his presence, their attention focused on something across the street. Alfred followed their gaze and saw Mr. Peterson walking towards the palace, his cane tapping lightly on the pavement. A wave of fear washed over Alfred. He knew what was about to happen. The thugs were going to target Mr. Peterson again. He had to act fast. Just as the thugs began to cross the street, their intentions clear, a figure stepped out from the shadows behind them. Tall and imposing, dressed in the distinctive scarlet tunic and bearskin hat of a royal guard, the figure commanded immediate attention. The thugs froze, their faces contorted in surprise. They hadn't noticed the other guard, his presence hidden in the dim light. Now they were caught between two guards, their escape route blocked. Alfred, seeing his opportunity, stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Gentlemen," he said, "I believe we have some unfinished business." The thugs, realizing they were trapped, exchanged panicked glances. They had underestimated the guards, their arrogance blinding them to the danger. Now, they were facing the consequences of their actions. Reinforcements arrived moments later, sirens wailing in the distance. The thugs, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, were quickly apprehended. As they were led away in handcuffs, their faces etched with defeat, Alfred felt a sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. Mr. Peterson, who had witnessed the entire scene from a safe distance, approached Alfred with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Alfred," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You saved me again." Alfred smiled back, his heart filled with relief. "It was my duty, Mr. Peterson," he said. "And this time, they won't be bothering anyone ever again." The incident served as a powerful reminder that prejudice and hate still existed, but it also demonstrated the power of unity and courage. Alfred and Mr. Peterson, two individuals from different backgrounds, had stood together against injustice, their bond a testament to the enduring human spirit. And as the news of the thugs' arrest spread throughout the city, a collective sigh of relief echoed through the streets. The people of London knew that they were safe, protected by the vigilant eyes of the Royal Guard, men like Alfred, who stood ready to defend them, regardless of race or creed.